get started with the second panel of the day, entitled Bridging Innovation and Regulation, Advancing U.S. Armenia Technology Collaboration. I'm going to let Karén do all the heavy lifting, but I just want to point out that this reflects years and years of work done by members of the Armenian bar on this particular topic. So it's really exciting that we're able to highlight the work of one of our subcommittees. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karén.
Thank you very much, Ani. What honor it is to follow such a distinguished previous panel with their stories and anecdotes. But we'll hope to switch gears a little bit for this panel, and like Ani said, talk about U.S. Armenia technology and business collaboration, and have an opportunity to highlight a little bit about the work of just one of the committees of the Armenian Bar Association, which is one of many of the committees that do various multifaceted, interesting, important, and impactful work. So I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, so if any questions come up, please save them for that time. So with that said, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Ani, the Armenian Bar leadership, our hosts, our organizers, our distinguished panelists, and all of you attendees for coming and making this possible. It truly is an honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. So our panel today is about advancing U.S. Armenian technology and business collaboration. But I want to frame it more broadly. It's not just about any single MOU, legal reform, or agency initiative. I'd like to make it a conversation about how law becomes economic infrastructure and moves progress forward. Armenia has real assets, technical talent, strong science and engineering tradition, a growing technology sector. It has a sophisticated diaspora, some of which are here today, and increasing government recognition that high-tech, AI, semiconductors, software, intellectual property, commercialization, trade, and investment are strategic national priorities. But talent alone does not produce investment. Ideas alone don't produce companies, and legal reforms alone don't create trust unless they're implemented, enforced, and understood by the market and the people in it. That's why today's discussion brings together three perspectives. The committee's long-term reform and implementation work, that's the IPIT Techlaw Committee of the Armenian Bar Association, institutional and U.S. Department of Commerce CLDP perspective, and private practice, company side, AI governance, startup, privacy, cybersecurity, export control, and technology transfer perspective. So if I can ask to please have our other panelists up on the screen. I'll begin by introducing myself first. My name is Karén Tonoyan. I'm the founding attorney of Tono Law Group and co-chair, together with Demirchyan, of the Armenian Bar Association's IPIT or Techlaw Committee. My practice focuses on intellectual property, technology, business, startups, investment structures, and cross-border U.S. Armenia innovation matters. Through the IPIT Committee, we've been able to help lead multi-year legal and policy initiatives involving U.S. and Armenian government counterparts, private sector stakeholders, universities, diaspora professionals, and international partners. So I would first like to introduce, I hope I can call you a friend at this point, Mr. Zmarak, the Deputy Chief Counsel with the Commercial Law Development Program at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Zmarak's work includes legal and regulatory capacity building, commercial law development, and support for institutional reforms that strengthen trade, investment, commercialization, and rule of law frameworks that in the Armenia context and beyond, of course, in many other countries and jurisdictions. In more recent times, Zmarak has been involved in regional IP engagement, follow-up coordination, and a notable success that I'll ask him to mention about judicial and prosecutorial training, Armenia's IP and high-tech strategy work, and broader efforts to connect Armenian innovation, IP protection, commercialization, and U.S. Armenia business collaboration. And our other distinguished panelist that we have joining us by Zoom today is Demirchyan, an attorney specializing in technology law, who's currently heading 2 startups focusing on AI safety and governance. Greg is a senior law and society fellow at UC Berkeley's Simons Institute for the Theory of Computing, where he works on technical standards and policies for evaluating risks posed by advanced frontier AI models. He previously was a partner at a litigation firm in San Francisco and served as general counsel for several technology startups, and works internationally as lead advisor for the Armenian Bar Association's Rule of Law and Anti-Corruption. He has presented and published on algorithmic fairness, regulatory alignment, AI ethics, data privacy, and technology transfers, and holds both a JD and a PhD in moral and political philosophy. So please let's have a round of applause for our distinguished panel. Allow me to please say a few notes about the IPIT committee before we delve into our topic discussions with our panelists. So for those of you that don't know, the Armenian Bar Association's IPIT Techlaw committee was formed back in 2018 because Armenia's technology ecosystem needed more than just goodwill and enthusiasm as it grew and developed. It needed legal infrastructure and frameworks. The committee's work has been focused on identifying legal and regulatory barriers to innovation, preparing practical recommendations, and working with Armenian government counterparts, U.S. government counterparts, and private sector stakeholders, as well as universities and diaspora experts to support implementation. And as a committee, on behalf of the committee, I'm very grateful for all the support that our colleagues and our leadership at the Armenian Bar Association has provided to us since our inception at one of these events back in 2018 at one of our meetings at Columbia University in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And all of this work that we've done over the past 7.5, almost 8 years now, has produced real results. The committee's reports and recommendations have helped support reforms relevant to software patentability, substantive examination at the Armenian Intellectual Property Office, corporate law and minority shareholder protection, increasing investor confidence, and improvement to the IP enforcement and commercialization infrastructure in Armenia. Our work has also included support and arguing for eventually the creation of the Armenian Mediation and Arbitration Center, representatives of which we have here with us today, which was a dispute resolution infrastructure project developed in collaboration with the Armenian Bar Association, Armenian General Benevolent Union, and the Ministry of Justice of Armenia. But the committee's work has not only been about drafting reports and recommendations. It's been about building the legal and institutional infrastructure that allows innovation to become protectable, investable, and commercially scalable. That includes modernization of the IP office, judicial education, IP awareness, university research and research institution, IP ownership and technology transfer, customs and border enforcement, as well as Armenia's national IP strategy. This latest phase of our work, after 2 reports and 2 implementation follow-up phases, is phase 5, which comes on the heels of the 2025 Memorandum of Understanding that Armenia and the U.S. signed among 3 other memorandum of understandings on artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and intellectual property, as well as the relationships that Armenian Bar Association has built also under memorandums of understanding with the high-tech ministry of Armenia. And under that, the IPIT committee and ministry established a framework for collaboration to stimulate innovation, support development of IP rights, and enhance awareness of IP among private and public sector entities. And cooperating with the economy ministry as well, we'd like to work together with sector-specific organizations and support various programs that the government has in place. The point that I want to make at the outset here is that Armenia is not attractive because everything there is figured out and finished. Quite the opposite. Armenia is attractive because there's technical capacity, reform momentum, and diaspora engagement. And it's still an open opportunity to shape the legal and institutional architecture needed for investment, for commercialization, and trusted technology and business collaboration. So, I'd like to turn to Zmarak and give him an opportunity to say a few words about his work his department, and I also understand that there are some opportunities available in the federal government on the heels of our previous panel that are open, especially to people with certain legal and language skills and certain backgrounds that I'd like for Zmarak to highlight. And before we get into any Armenia-specific related questions, and it would be helpful for the audience to understand the Commerce Department, the Commercial Law Development Program, CLDP's role, and how the program works and approaches the type of legal and commercial capacity building that we'll be talking about. Please.
Awesome. Good morning. Body Lewis. By the way, we were just in our Yerevan together, and I don't know if we mentioned that part, what the committee, represented by you, was just in Yerevan about, what was it, a month or two ago? April, we were out together, and they did an amazing job, by the way, but I did say, good morning, how's everybody doing, in Armenian when I started. And then afterwards, in the coffee break, I asked some of the people, how did I do? This is when I realized that maybe Armenians don't sugarcoat, because they were like, wasn't that great? Yeah. So I just stuck to body Lewis. I was like, I'm going to say that. Before I start, let me just ask a quick question, other than Heather, because she's my colleague, so I know she knows the answer to this one. How many people have heard of CLDP? Okay, I didn't expect any hands to go up, but a few did, okay. How many of you have, and by the way, I loved listening to the first panel. I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that you went before me, because then I can transition as my first point into this. How many of the folks in here would like to be in some way, ideally in a legal setting, involved to do some work related to Armenia? Everybody. I want to talk to all of you. Now, how many of you actually know how to speak Armenian? I really want to talk to you. All right. So our office, the Commercial Law Development Program, we're the Legal and Technical Assistance Office of the U.S. government. We work in about, actually more than 85 different countries on commercial legal reform issues. We're split into 7 different divisions. Armenia is in our Eurasia division, which stops in Central Asia, and then past that is our Asia Pacific division. We now have actually a Europe division as well that suffered from our Eurasia division. In my previous job, I used to be the head of our Europe and Eurasia division, which included Armenia, and currently we don't have the head of our Europe and Eurasia division, so in an acting capacity, I'm doing that work as well. We work in maybe 3 main sort of categories of work. It falls into one of 3 buckets, I would say. The first one is commercial legal reforms. So these are laws, regulations, policy frameworks, strategies, etc., where we work with foreign governments to help them achieve their economic growth goals and at the same time ensure that it creates a good business environment for American businesses and also hopefully counter the malign influence of our adversaries. So for example, in Armenia, we're working on the IP strategy. In Armenia, we're working on the procurement law, for example, there. We're working on public-private partnership laws as well. So that's the sort of legal and regulatory reform piece. The second area is we help either build or improve institutions. You just mentioned, for example, the Arbitration and Mediation Center. We work very closely with AMCA, which is the Armenian Mediation and Arbitration Center, where we want to make sure that they can provide the absolute best services that they can, because that's good for Armenia, but it's also good for Hilton and Marriott and MasterCard and Visa Card and all the American businesses that exist there. And we also want to make sure it's a commercially viable institution so that when the US isn't supporting it, it can actually sustain as an organization. And then the third area where we work is we help create market access for American companies in those countries. So, for example, public-private partnership projects like PPPs is a brand new area for Armenia. That's the way where you come in and you want to build a highway or an airport or renewable energy or what have you. You're looking for a company to go from, ideally from outside, and bring in their investment in innovation and technology, and work with the public, in this case the government, so that they can do a PPP. And so ideally we would want that to be an American company, not a Chinese company. So we work with, for example, in this case, the Ministry of Finance of Armenia to ensure that we do that. So creating that market access is the third area. Now I do want to take maybe a minute to really tell you about job opportunities we have, and then maybe in the break I can talk to you more about it. So we have lawyers, they're U.S. government lawyers, so you have to be hired into the U.S. government. The good news there is you don't have to go through USA Jobs, because being a lawyer is an accepted service. It's not a competitive service, so you don't have to go through USA Jobs to become a lawyer, for example. You just tell me if your resume is good enough and you have the interest. We can give you an interview. And you could be working on Armenia, or you could be working on the entire Eurasia portfolio. And we are looking, by the way, right now to hire, because I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Aram who said that decisions were made and now we're trying to hire more and more people. Again, so we're trying to hire about 25 lawyers on our various teams. The second opportunity we have is, and this goes to the question that was posed, if you're not in DC, what happens? Because you have to be in person for that US government official jobs for security reasons and all that other stuff. But we also have subject matter experts that we work with, that we hire often on contract basis, and they can work from anywhere. And effectively, if you have the expertise and the experience either in the subject matter or in the country where you speak the relevant language, then we want to bring you on board. And then the third, and I think the most common way we have, is we have about 72 law firms that work with us on pro bono basis. There's one law firm, for example, I just asked them if they can give me the number on one project and how many pro bono hours they gave us. It was about $1.4 million worth of pro bono hours that they gave us. So to the extent that you want to give back to Armenia and you want to be involved, and the committee has been a fantastic partner to us, for example. And it was as part of that partnership when we were out in Yerevan together. So that's another opportunity where you might have your job and it's a full-time job, and then you have a little bit of, a week out and you want to go visit Armenia and you want to do some work out there while you're there. We can pay your costs to be able to go out there, and you just offer your skills on a pro bono basis. And I'm happy to talk to you in more details on any one of those three opportunities.
Thank you, Zmarak. For our audience, and to put your offer in context, could you please speak a little bit about what CLDP's mission actually is, how it works with partner countries, and then how does that all connect to Armenia-related work streams, and specifically for our purposes, IP strategy and commercialization, enforcement, and so forth, and especially if you could highlight the recent success with judicial and prosecutorial training.
Okay, so our mission really is to work, actually we were created at the fall of the Soviet Union to help the former Soviet countries go from state-owned economies into an open market competitive economies. We have since expanded, and as I said, we have active projects in over 85 countries. I think Armenia might be in our top 10 in terms of just the number of projects that we have and the amount of work that we do there. So it's pretty big, especially for a relatively smaller country in terms of population, that it's really in a class above its weight for sure. Our goal really is twofold, I would say, from purely the U.S. interest perspective, is that if there's a good business environment, it's for American businesses, then it creates opportunities for American businesses to be able to make money there and create the influence that we're looking for in that specific country, right? So as I said, say we talked about arbitration and mediation or dispute resolution in general. If businesses can resolve disputes efficiently and effectively and transparently, in Armenia absolutely needs that, because nobody's going to want to come in and invest in a country and sign these large contracts if you cannot enforce that contract. But it's also necessary for Marriott and for Hilton and for Apple and Google and all the American companies that exist there. So it's a win-win situation that we do. The flip side of that is countries, when they want to, especially larger countries who have their companies as backed by the government, so you have a lot of state-owned enterprises from certain companies, certain countries, when they're looking to do debt traps and end up owning your airport or your port or other critical infrastructure, they often do that by taking advantage of the gaps in your legal and regulatory system. And so the second purpose that we have, what we do there in these countries, is to ensure that countries don't have gaps such that another large country have their own state-owned companies come in and basically own critical infrastructure in these countries. That's not of interest to us, but it's also not good for the country. So essentially our goal and our mission is to look out for the interests of the United States, whether it's the business interest or the national security interest. But at the same time, one of the things I love about our work is that it's not at the expense of our host countries. It is done in a way that it actually helps our host countries. Now, the second part of your question about the judicial and prosecutorial academy and the work that we're going to do with them is among the various areas where we work one is intellectual property. The U.S., so my figures are a little bit older, like right before COVID older, so these numbers might change, but the U.S. owns about 51% of the world's intellectual property. That's more than the whole world combined. Which means if countries have a good regulatory system and a legal system for IP protection and enforcement, it's good for that country because you don't want DHL to go there. True story, by the way, DHL to go there, and then across the street there's a DAHL open up. Literally happened in a country, and by the way, the DAHL would receive packages and then take it across the street to DHL and mail it, and you get a judgment from the local court and they can't do anything about it. Or we had a big Kabul fried chicken, KFC, with a KFC logo in the middle of Kabul and we were in Afghanistan. But can't do that, obviously. And then they want KFC to also go there and invest in. KFC's like, I'm not going to come over here and invest in your country, right? So IP is a very important area for us in that regard. There's a second component of it. Maybe I'll pause on that one and not say anything about that yet, but which is IP commercialization. How do you take innovation, and I think Denise, you might have said this to me on one of the calls, that in the Soviet Union time, they used to say you pick up a rock in Armenia and there's a scientist underneath it or something to the effect. Somebody, yeah.
Nikita Khrushchev said that.
Khrushchev said that, exactly.
Khrushchev said, under every rock in Armenia and Yerevan is a scientist.
And the Minister of Finance told me that exact same thing, so must be true, right? Yeah. So we're doing this IP commercialization work because of that very issue there. But on the IP enforcement and protection issue, the two key stakeholders on that are the prosecutors, because they're the ones who have to go out and prosecute IP issues. There's a civil side to it as well, but the criminal side is incredibly important. That's the side that's often lacking in most countries. And then the other side is the adjudication side, right? You go, if the prosecutor even brings the case, but that if the judge's attitude is like, it was just fake Adidas, like let the person pay half price for Adidas, who cares? Well, it's not. It could be fake vaccines, it could be fake Colgate in your kid's mouth. So it's not just the fact that you have a fake Apple charger and you got it for cheap. If the system is lacking, fake vaccine is going to come into your country too, and that fake Colgate is going to come into your country as well. So the adjudication side of that is another important component. Well, there are two ways you could really approach that. And the first way is something we had done, which is you bring in, 15, 20, 30 judges, you put them in a room and you give them a training, ideally, and mostly from American judges who come in and do that. You bring in 20, 30 prosecutors in a room, and we usually bring in our prosecutors from the Department of Justice. Actually, our Department of Justice prosecutor was with us when we were out in Yerevan, Christy O'Malley. And you train them, but it's not the most effective way. So one thing we did is, when I was up there and when we were out together, I had a chance to go visit the Armenia Prosecutorial and Judicial Academy. This is the academy that trains virtually every single incoming prosecutor in Armenia. Every single prosecutor is required to go through a 9-month training before they become a prosecutor. And then every single incoming judge is required to go through a judicial academy training. And again, every judge, depending on what type of a judge you are, it's from 9 months to 12 months you're required to go through this training. Then you also have the sitting judges, what they call them in-service judges. They receive sort of the equivalent of CLEs. They're required to do CLEs. So when we were out there, I had a chance to meet the rector, who by the way is a really nice guy. He was out on vacation somewhere in the mountains in Armenia, came back to Yerevan just to meet me, and he immediately agreed and said that they would amend the curriculum of the judges as well as the prosecutors, both of those in service as well as those who are incoming. And we can incorporate into the curriculum content on IP protection and on IP enforcement, as well as, by the way, on ADR and a few other topics as well, cybersecurity. And then we would work with the instructors, the professors who teach the judges and the prosecutors. And then they basically would institutionalize it and teach it. So that we thought was a pretty nice success, because we're on track to really make that happen in the beginning of 2027, and we're going to work with you on that.
You can imagine, yes, please. You can imagine what a welcome piece of news this is, and Denise is nodding in the audience, because all of the topics mentioned, including the judicial training that Zmarak was just talking about, was part of our multiple reports that our committee has prepared and submitted to various bodies in the government, which have resulted in legislative and regulatory changes and new law and amendments being passed and enforced in Armenia. But even if you have the best laws and regulations and the best intentions, unless people are aware of them and they're properly being used and enforced, and the people responsible for the implementation are really taking it into consideration, it's not very effective. So that's where the CLDP and the programs that Zmarak is talking about come into effect. In a couple of sentences, Mike, can you just tell us, please, what success would look like for this program, let's say a year from now? Or a year from starting?
Yeah, well, hopefully less than a year from now. Well, let me first tell you what would be success for us, for example, I'll pick one area, and then what success looks like then in working with the prosecutorial and the judicial academy of Armenia. So say you're working on dispute resolution. Okay, I'm just going to take that as an example since we talked a bit about ADR. There are three things we care about. 3 wins, effectively, is what we care about. First is you have a large American investor company that's in Armenia. You have a dispute that comes up. You're obviously not going to get that resolved through the court system in Armenia. You typically go to an arbitral institution outside of Armenia. So it could be London, it could be Paris, it could be Hong Kong, it could be SIAC, Singapore International Arbitration Center. Typically, you would have Armenia agree to something like that. You get the arbitral award from one of these institutions. You now need to bring it back to Armenia and get that arbitral award recognized and enforced. So the first thing we care about is for Armenia to have a mechanism in place where foreign arbitral awards get recognized and enforced in many, many, many different countries, despite being a member of the New York Convention, which is what requires foreign arbitral awards to be recognized and enforced. They don't do that. They find 1,000,001 exceptions. They often relitigate it based on merits, and you're not allowed to do that. So that's the first win that we look for. The second one we look for is, say you have a smaller dispute. You have a Marriott hotel and you're just trying to hire a painter who comes in to do some basic renovations and paint, and it's a $500,000 job. You're not going to go to Paris for that. It's just too small of a dispute. So what you want is you want a local institution available to you, like the AMCA, the Mediation and Arbitration Center in Armenia, that in an apolitical manner can resolve that dispute for you. And then the third win we often look for relates to the legal and regulatory side. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was out there, I had a chance to meet the Minister of Justice, and when I'm leaving the meeting, he said, "Oh, by the way, I know you're getting ready to see the Minister of Finance. can you raise an issue for me with him? And I said, and he said, I know it's going to be important to you. And the issue was Armenia just, by the way, about a month or two ago, passed a procurement law. And they passed the procurement law with the intention of trying to attract American businesses to come and bid on certain large Armenian contracts to be able to actually do some of the large projects. And they're not getting a whole lot of American companies interested in Armenia. The market's just too small for your typical American companies. And so, but the thing is, the law actually subjects any company that comes into a local court. And they said, that obviously we're telling the Minister of Finance to make it more flexible so parties can actually negotiate where disputes would occur. So the third win that we often look for is that type of legal and regulatory reform. Now, in the case of, and it in large part depends on, as you talked about, the implementation of that on the prosecutorial and the judicial academy. So the win in that specific case, then for us, the way that would look is we incorporate into the curriculum for all the judges, incoming and sitting, content on the New York Convention, for example, on the recognition and enforceability of foreign arbitral award, such that virtually every single new Armenian judge understands, under the law of Armenia and under the New York Convention, of which Armenia is a member, their legal obligation, and so that they can then recognize and enforce foreign arbitral award. So a success would look like the content being there, the experts who teach those really understand that content, and then effectively teach it to every single incoming judge as well as all relevant sitting judges. And you can apply that to the prosecutors on the IP side, you can apply that to the judges on the IP side, as well as you can apply that to the judges on all other relevant topics important to the United States.
Thank you, Zmarak. And I would like to highlight that this is a part of an approach and attitude that CLDP has towards doing programs in Armenia and other countries where there is a long-lasting and ongoing, high-impact, high ROI type projects where it's not a transactional one-and-done type of engagement. It's more long-term that results in a return on an ongoing basis. It's let's say an investment that the U.S. government can do at one point, but continues deriving benefits from it for the local partners for a long time to come.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So an example of the one time would be, we went and took 5 American judges to just do a training for 50 Armenian judges, and you come home and everybody just celebrates. Take nice pictures, enjoy good Armenian food. That'd be a one-time thing. We would rather not do that. Instead, we'd rather institutionalize it through the Judicial Academy such that it would not only reach those 50 judges, but virtually all judges, and now the institution is better and capable of teaching that. So you institutionalize it in a sustainable manner.
Great, thank you for that. And allow me to, we spent a lot of time talking to Zmarak, direct a question to Greg in this regard, in the context of U.S. companies doing business in Armenia that Zmarak has been highlighting. And since your expertise is in private practice, Greg, can you tell us a little bit about, maybe a little bit more about your experience, but specifically about times when you advise technology companies or you look at investment diligence, how important is enforceability? In the context of what we were just talking about, for example, how does a credible court or arbitration environment affect whether IP, data rights, software ownership, trade secret protection, and so forth actually support investment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, enforcement matters a lot, and it's critical that first and foremost, if a company decides to do business in a foreign country, that the court system there, the judicial system there is comparable to the system in which in the country in which the company is headquartered, U.S. or in a Western European country, so that there is you sort of, as a company assessing the risks, you know that if something happens and there's a disagreement or a dispute, that you can appeal to the judicial system of the country, of the foreign country, and you'll get a reasonable, fair result. However, if you don't have that kind of confidence and you're not sure about the system, the judicial system, the legal system in the foreign country that you're going to start a business or you're already operating, then you're looking to other sort of mechanisms for dispute resolution. And that's why arbitration is such an important thing, because if there's enough flexibility, you're not trusting the domestic courts, you can always go to the tribunal, arbitration tribunal, and get your case be litigated there, and you're fairly confident that you'll get a fair result. So yeah, that's really important. So I would say that for Armenia's standpoint, it's really important to continue to engage and do necessary judicial reforms there to bring the system up to par and make it comparable to what we have in the U.S. or in Western European countries, so that there is that kind of confidence on the part of the investor. Short of that, of course, this is a process that takes a long time. You want other mechanisms, to be available, so that there is some assurance by the foreign investor and the foreign company, that they'll get in case there's any sort of dispute, they'll get a fair result. So it's quite important.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that perspective from the private sector angle. I'd like to move the discussion a little bit more into the topics of Armenia being an innovation, technology, and business jurisdiction. As we were talking, I kind of want to highlight Armenia's value proposition. I'm happy that the successes that Zmarak has recorded recently now no longer presents Armenia just as a jurisdiction with issues or challenges, but now it's a developing innovation ecosystem. And the better question is whether the country has talent, reform momentum, and institutional willingness on the part of the partners to solve them. And it seems like Armenia does. So I'd like to talk about another topic that you raised, and that's Armenia's commercialization opportunity that involves innovative companies and founders and creative IP that can potentially scale through American investors, VCs, partners, Armenian-American business and professional networks. How do you see that diaspora-linked commercialization and business development happening?
That's actually Armenia has a lot of potential in this area. So IP commercialization is effectively you have innovation in Armenia. You have an amazing startup. It doesn't even have to be a startup. You have a great company. Ideally, what you're looking for is you're looking to scale it, right? Like you want to go to the next level. You came up with an Uber-like idea and you create a small twist to it and you want to now take it global. In the best place, obviously, you can go is the U.S. And this is where sort of from the angel investors to the VCs to the joint ventures, et cetera, that's what's most important to you. The reason why I think that we probably put Armenia in sort of our top 5 countries in this specific area is the Armenian American diaspora. There are some really, really smart, successful, and wealthy Armenians in the United States. Now, the diaspora is really important because the truth is, say we're doing this work in Georgia, but as a true example, it's really hard to get John Smith, random person, excited about Georgia. They think I'm talking about Atlanta when I'm really talking about policing. Right? But if I'm talking to you about Armenia, it's really easy to get you excited because you have this affinity towards that country. And if you're a successful lawyer, successful entrepreneur, and you're a part of an amazing VC, it's really easy to get you excited about that opportunity. And so we're now doing this IP commercialization work in which there are a couple of different ways we do it. A, we work with helping create and build what we call TTOs, technology transfer offices within the university framework, so that if there's innovation that comes out of the university, how do you take it to industry? How do you commercialize it? The second area is working with the IP or just innovative accelerators and incubators within the country. And then the third is working with the government. And then we do this in the ways of, in addition to building those institutions like the TTOs, we do some trainings and support, and then we really just do that B2B, connecting American VCs, investors, companies back to, again, the Armenian innovators and creators. And the VC side, that American side, is often Armenian Americans, and this is why they end up becoming the key. This is why we think that this is an amazing high potential area for Armenia.
Thank you, Zmarak, and not to detract anything from our Georgian partners and friends, but this is indeed an opportunity that Armenian Americans and Armenian diaspora provides for this type of business interaction. And the committee's legal work is intended to support not just the legislative and regulatory changes and things like that, but as Zmarak mentioned, the latest two kind of direction that we've been working on are these university IP frameworks and technology transfer offices. Namely, one of them is the American University of Armenia, with which the Armenian Bar Association has an MOU and helped kickstart the technology transfer office there. And now, import-export control and AI and semiconductor readiness in the context of the MOU that I mentioned earlier. All for facilitating the business for U.S. Armenia companies that do business in both jurisdictions or trying to move from one to the other. And in that context, Greg, if I can ask you to comment from the company and investor side, can you tell us what converts Armenia from the perspective of Armenia has excellent engineers into, well, this is a company we can finance, partner, and acquire and do business with more specifically?
Well, I think it's, like any investor, you're looking at talent is very, very important. You're looking at, if you're investing in a company, you're investing in a team. And so the background of the team members is important. So talent and the educational level and the professionalism of Armenian scientists is critical. Of course, you're also looking at not just the team, but you're also looking at the product, and that's critical. And if you're investing, usually VCs are looking at companies that can scale up very quickly. The product is something that it doesn't, and they typically don't invest in companies that have a product that has a narrow focus. They want the upside, right? It's typically these startups that VCs invest in are quite risky, but you want that uptick in growth. That's what you're looking for. You're always looking for these growth outliers, because 99 out of 199 of the companies companies invest in typically fail, and it's that 1% that makes up everything, right? So you're looking at talent is clearly important, the product is important, what exactly is being commercialized, but also you're also looking at the legal system. If you're investing in Armenia or any other country, you're looking at, well, what are the risks to the company, right? So there are legal risks to the company. For example, if the laws are permissive enough and they don't protect the company from rapacious other companies, right? So the legal regime has to be fairly strong to protect the company in case there is some dispute or conflict, or that successful companies are just not taken over by larger companies. And that was, I worked in Russia many years ago, and doing precisely this kind of thing. We were at the time hoping in 2012, 2013 to implement in Russia, and that meant, of course, legal reform, judicial reform, all kinds of reforms, and to give that sense of security to U.S. investors and foreign investors to come and invest in Russia and invest in Russian companies. But then, we realized that that wasn't enough because the institutions just weren't there. Even though the laws that were on the books were fairly good, there wasn't the proper enforcement mechanisms. And so what happened oftentimes is that successful companies, Russian or foreign companies, American companies, would be threatened, with all kinds of nefarious schemes, and from time to time you'll see companies actually, successful companies having their assets seized, or another company would basically come and take over and buy the company for a fraction of its actual value. And that clearly is not a good thing for an investor, right? If you're investing in a company in Russia, you want to make sure that there are these legal protections there, and the enforcement mechanism is fairly robust to essentially to protect companies, successful companies from these kinds of scourges that happen in typically somewhat corrupt countries. And in Russia, like I said, we just were not successful because we helped with the laws, but the institutions weren't there and the enforcement wasn't there. So I'm hoping that in Armenia, of course, things are quite different, and there's this, very much this desire to bring foreign investors in, and I think there's a lot of progress happening on that end to make sure that companies, successful companies in Armenia, and there's already a track record. Lots and lots of companies in Armenia have been doing well, both foreign companies and domestic companies have been doing quite well, and maybe there are cases from time to time I hear where a tech company is having some sort of a problem, but it's nothing like what I saw in Russia. There's nothing like that. So that's a good thing. It's a good moment for Armenia.
Indeed, it's refreshing to hear, and it's a positive note, the comparative analysis there. And I think for our lawyer audience, it's also important to consider the private sector perspective, not just the legal and regulatory aspects of it, because we're talking about real companies with capital on the line doing business in different jurisdictions. So we can, with Greg's background, we can focus on things like AI governance, data, privacy, and cybersecurity in the context of market access and these companies doing business in Armenia, especially because this AI and semiconductor MOU that I mentioned earlier brings opportunity, but it also raises the bar. U.S. partners aren't going to evaluate Armenian technology companies only by their technical quality, as Greg just mentioned. They'll ask whether their data is handled responsibly, or whether the AI systems is governed properly, whether their cybersecurity is credible, whether IP and source code is controlled, and whether import-export obligations are being adhered to. So, Greg, given your AI safety and governance work, how should Armenian companies or AI companies think about governance as a market access and business infrastructure, rather than just an abstract legal requirement or ethics paperwork?
Yeah, that's a good question. AI governance is something that's still somewhat of a fledgling field, and partly because the regulations are still coming into shape. There's the EU's AI Act that came into force recently, and in the U.S., there are states that have passed significant regulations on AI, but it's more of a patchwork, much like data privacy laws in the U.S. It's sort of sector by sector. It's this comprehensive approach. That of course makes it that much harder to comply with, because if you're operating in multiple states in the U.S., you have to make sure that you're complying with all these individual state laws. So for Armenia, the standards, of course, what is happening in industry is that now there's a lot of work being done on defining standards for good governance and for especially advanced frontier models. There are significant risks involved, and the actual sort of identification of risks is an ongoing project, because it seems like almost every week, Anthropic or OpenAI will publish something saying, "Oh, well, we discovered a new risk," and you can imagine. Typically, these companies aren't required to disclose those things, these risks. They just do it from time to time. And presumably, internally, they've identified a lot more risks that they're not disclosing. So there are significant risks involved. And as a result, people have been thinking about, well, how do we manage, how do we control those risks? And standards are a critical component right now. So organizations like NIST in the US and ISO in Europe, they are the standard-making, standard-making organizations, and they've been working diligently on that. Standards, of course, are not required. It's kind of on a voluntary basis right now, for the most part. And but you see more and more companies being transparent about the fact that they are trying to comply with they have a risk management system, and they're trying to comply with safety measures and standards. And Armenian companies should also do the same. Partly, just from their own risk management, all kinds of liability issues, and you want to make sure that you take care of that. You have the necessary controls internally so that you minimize risk, and in case something happens, you have controls to mitigate risk. But again, that is an ongoing, it's an ongoing field, and that's something that I'm working on, and it's very much an evolving field, and so it's not like you have this ready-made framework that you can apply. The framework is, in some sense, work in progress at this point. And so if you're a company operating in Armenia and you want to make sure that you have a proper risk management system, then you have to do a lot of work to make sure that you're complying with the most current, most up-to-date standards for safety. It's not just safety, it's also other things as well, but safety is primarily the main concern. And as these models become more and more advanced, you want to make sure that you're, of course, these are OpenAI and Anthropic. These are companies based in the US, but there are thousands and thousands of companies all over the world in the US that are building. They're in the AI sort of ecosystem, and they're building products that use artificial intelligence, and typically these are companies that are building agents to automate certain tasks, right? So the frontier models, what we call advanced frontier models, these are open, models that are built by OpenAI and Anthropic. They're also called foundational because a lot of the applications sit on top of these frontier models. So the agents will. Basically, an agent is, it automates certain tasks, but it uses, one these foundational frontier models with additional training and fine-tuning and so on. And I can certainly see lots of Armenian companies in Armenia who are interested in artificial intelligence building these kinds of agents, for automating tasks in different kinds of industries. And it's very important that they not simply rely on the safety of the foundational or the underlying model that is being used, but because the agent itself presents additional risks. And the agents, of course, these days, it's not a single agent, there are multiple agent interactions, and you have to make sure that you understand how these, your agent interacts with other agents and the kinds of risks that generates and the kind of liability that it presents. And so you have to do your own due diligence and make sure that you have, the right standards and the right controls for your product, and that's because it presents these additional novel risks. And you have to also keep in touch with the standards that are being generated by these organizations like NIST and other research centers that work on just simply identifying risks. Like MIT has a lab that all it does is just identify novel risks. And that as a company, you want to make sure that you monitor, even if you have a compliance or risk management system, you have to make sure that it evolves because the underlying models are constantly changing and evolving, presenting novel risks. And your own agent that's on top of these present additional risks. And of course, the way they interact with other agents, the agents themselves might change with which your agent is interacting with. So that you have to constantly monitor, make sure that the compliance program you have is up to date and is tracking these new and novel risks that arise as the technology evolves.
Thank you, Greg. And for context for our audience, the agents that Greg is talking about are automated systems that can take steps and make certain decisions by themselves with human guidance. As we heard, this is not only an ongoing area of technological development, but of legal and regulatory development as well. And there's, although there might not be concrete, clear-cut answers for everything yet, we're moving towards that direction based on what Greg said. So, Zmarak, turning back to you, from your institutional and commercialization perspective, how do these IP and data governance and cybersecurity and responsible tech practices fit together if the goal is to, let's say, help Armenian companies scale with U.S. partners or help U.S. companies do business in Armenia?
Just listening to Greg, by the way, in the intro you mentioned one of his area of expertise was theory of computing. And in his last answer, it made sense, because I wrote it down thinking, I wonder what that even is. But now listening to him, I still didn't understand half of what he said, but I thought that might have been the theory of computing. From sort of a legal and regulatory point of view and from a government perspective, the way I look at that is, I almost, the analogy I would use in the IP commercialization space in helping find the types of technology and innovation in Armenia that you can help scale in partnership with the U.S. So you then therefore help Armenia, but at the same time create that necessary nexus to the U.S. It's almost like you're going to Armenia to find a soccer star who can come and play in the European League. I'm sure there are some really, really good people in Armenia who could play very, very well. So say in the entire country you have about 10,000 people who play really well, but let's say there are 1,000 that you would consider like people who can play at a pro level, but then you're really looking at 5 people who can come out and actually play in the European League. That's what it's like to find that one company, that one innovation, that one technology that you're looking for that would be ripe for partnership with the U.S., whether it's through JV or VCs or some other form, right? So our goal then becomes, how do we help create that environment in order to make that successful? So whether that is, like one of the things, for example, we're working on is Armenia is creating an IP strategy right now, both under the Ministry of Economy from an economic perspective, but also from the Ministry of High Tech from a technological perspective. So our job now is, and by the way, so we're helping them develop these strategies to do it in a way that would make it such that we would be able to easily identify these companies and be able to connect them back to the U.S. Then there's the institutional building side that I think you guys have done an amazing job on with, for example, American University there, and others, where you build institutions in place that can help identify those soccer stars that you're looking for, the types of companies you're looking for. And then there might be actual specific interventions, whether it's the intervention in the form of like specific trainings we provide. There's an example that somebody actually in Armenia gave me where they said, you have a little Johnny somewhere in San Diego, comes home with like the worst drawing, but the mom says, oh my God, it's the best thing I've ever seen. And Johnny grows up thinking he's the best. And so then when he presents himself, he knows what to do. And then not just in the former Soviet countries, but in Armenia specifically, the minute you think you're amazing, somebody will tell you like, get out of here, like they'll put you in your place. So even just being able to pitch your idea and talk about yourself is a core skill that often lacks. So we sometimes say, how do you create the right founder's mindset, and then how do you pitch yourself to an American investor, for example, right? So that's sort of another area where we might come in and do this.
And speaking of supporting this innovation and investment ecosystem and the startup and the founder mindset, I would encourage anyone that has at all any interest in this field to become involved and engaged in various groups. There's a number of angel investment groups, especially the Armenian ones, like Science and Technology Angel Network, like Business Angel Networks of Armenia, like Armenian Investment Club of Armenia. These are the types of business partnerships that CLDP is seeking to support, and with your involvement, we can make this a more robust and comprehensive system, and help U.S. Armenia business collaboration with diaspora and expert involvement. I'd like to take just a few minutes and give an opportunity to highlight our committee's current work stream, our program on this import-export research in the context of the MOU that I mentioned. And because export control can sound remote to lawyers who don't practice in this area, but especially right now for AI, semiconductors, cybersecurity, telecommunications, and so forth, and dual-use technology, export controls can really affect whether companies can receive equipment, access certain technologies, get U.S. originating know-how there, and employ, let's say, cross-border engineering teams or development teams that many companies have to do deals with U.S. companies. So this is why the committee's current Phase 5 work is structured as a research roadmap project, but not just commentary. Our purpose is, it focuses on practical pathways. Things like how countries are designated into certain groups, processes at the BIS office, being deemed as a verified end user, and so forth, meeting import-export control regime requirements, and the challenges that being part of the Eurasian Economic Union might pose for that type of interaction. And our goal isn't just to kind of smooth out or sugarcoat some challenges and issues that might be there in this area, but it's to help Armenia and Armenian companies, as well as U.S. companies doing business between the two countries, understand the rules, identify the levers and the issues, and create credible and robust compliance and policy initiatives, and that supports this deeper U.S.-Armenia collaboration. So Greg, can you just briefly, I want to just take just a couple of minutes, and can you walk the audience through the committee's current research framework and what it involves, and just to give our listeners a perspective on what it is that we're working on and why it's important. And if you could keep it brief, we would appreciate it.
Yes, please, yeah. That's a good point. Sometimes I can be long-winded, so I apologize for that. Yeah, so what we're working on is this issue of U.S. exports to Armenia and technology transfer, which is part of that. Armenia is aspiring to be a kind of a regional technology hub, and technology transfers are obviously critical for that. Innovation is a kind of a global cooperative project, and when you innovate, your innovation oftentimes depends on what others have done. And as the other panelists here mentioned, just how important U.S. is in terms of innovating, right? So much of the innovation happens in the U.S. Basically, the majority of the innovations happen here. And that means that there's a lot of really important, valuable technology in the U.S. And a lot of that is dual use and falls under U.S. export controls and regulations. And because Armenia wants to be, aspires to be a technology hub, it needs to export certain products and certain technologies. And now, in the AI space in particular, it's that's one area where Armenia wants to lead in the region. One of the critical things, of course, are the GPUs. These are chips that are produced by NVIDIA, companies like NVIDIA, that are tightly controlled, basically, you can't just go to NVIDIA and say, hey, NVIDIA, send me a bunch of your top of the line GPU chips to us, right? So because it falls under U.S. regulations. So now the unfortunate thing about Armenia right now, and this is what we're working on, is U.S. under U.S. law, U.S. looks at a number of things when it comes to exporting certain sensitive materials to other countries. And one of the things it looks at, of course, are these country classifications. So there are country A, country B, country C, D, and all the way to E. And Armenia is classified in D as a D1 country. Now, there are worse that can happen, and it can be D5 country where exports are very severely limited. But D1 too is problematic. What we want to be is to elevate our status to something like A, or to be viewed as more like countries that the U.S. sees as an ally, and where the risks are much less. The risk is much less that the product that is shipped to that destination might be diverted to another place, which, for instance, may be on the U.S.'s list of prohibited end users. So what we need to do, and this is the project that this is an ongoing project that we've embarked on, is to work on the status of Armenia's classification to make it easier for tech transfer and exports of certain technological items to Armenia. Without that, there are significant obstacles in the way. It doesn't. High-end chips like H200 NVIDIA chips, they're not prohibited, but you have to basically get a license for that particular item. And for Armenia, it's a case by case, and they look and this will look at the country profile, the kinds of risks and who the applicant is, what the company is applying to get these chips exported to it from the U.S. All of these things, in other words, are critical for assessing the risk that is posed by that kind of a export from the U.S. to Armenia. And that can be onerous, it's expensive, and it basically inhibits a more efficient and effective tech transfer. And also, if you're classified as an A or B, you're entitled to certain license exceptions, which make it a lot easier to get the item exported to you. So that's what we're working on. It's right now, Armenia, when it comes to these chips, we talked about the data importance, not that we talked about, but we all are aware of the data center that has been set up in Yerevan, and these data centers, of course, use these high-end chips and some of the IT infrastructure as well. It's also regulated under EAR. And it requires a license. But if we can change the regime, elevate Armenia's status, then the sort of the regulatory administrative cost of transferring these items to Armenia becomes less expensive, less onerous, and that obviously is incredibly important for innovation overall in Armenia.
Thank you, Greg, for that context, which is especially useful for those of us who are not too familiar with import-export and the implications of these regulations and regulatory regimes for the businesses doing work in Armenia. Companies like NVIDIA that you mentioned, Synopsys, AMD, National Instruments, and others, I'm sure I'm missing many, that are actively involved in this business in Armenia right now are facing these challenges. And in fact, this program, this research project that we're working on right now was motivated by the keynote speaker at our last Armenian Bar Association big meeting last November, Yerman Zoryan, who's the head of Synopsys Armenia and the chief engineer, or chief architect, indicating that these are challenges faced by these companies. And although companies have successes in getting some of these licenses on a one-off basis, and most recently the high-tech ministry just recently made an announcement that an Armenian company successfully received a license and was able to do it. This is not systematic across the board that facilitates doing business for those types of companies. And this is a practical connection between policy and actual transaction. If Armenia wants deeper U.S. Armenia technology and business collaboration, it would need more than just favorable treatment every once in a while. It would need to show that companies, ministries, customs authorities, and the private sector stakeholders understand the concerns and can operate within the frameworks that Greg just highlighted. But there's a lot of other work that is ongoing as well. Things like modernizing the IP office, raising awareness on both the public and the private sector, and as Greg mentioned, making Armenian Innovation Center. What this means is a hub for filing IP, for commercialization, for doing business. And one of the committee's recurring themes is that Armenia has already more legal tools than the market or most people realize. And the gap really is in awareness and access and confidence. We've heard misunderstandings, even from sophisticated stakeholders that we were talking to in April, who assume that filing in Armenia might not be worthwhile or starting in Armenia might not be worthwhile. And that's exactly the narrative that we're trying to change. So the question to Zmarak is, how do you see this modernization, let's say IP office modernization, or the IP strategy on the economy or the high-tech ministry, fitting into the broader U.S. Armenia technology and business collaboration picture?
First would be, I think they obviously need the international perspective to be able to, especially from an advanced country like the U.S., to be able to bring that perspective in, so we could help guide how for Armenia, from a government perspective, to be successful in this space. Second, it also gives us an opportunity for us to be able to incorporate into it things that are important to the U.S. And if it's important to the U.S. and Armenia is looking to improve its relationship and build more technological bridges with the U.S., that opinion ends up becoming important. And then the third, and in some ways I think the most important aspect of it is very common in that region, and it's absolutely not unique to Armenia, is the types of papers and frameworks that come out are incredible, tons of them, but there's not much of an implementation afterwards. So one of the things that we've committed to, when we were out there, I had a chance to see both the Deputy Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister of Economy, and then the Deputy Minister of High-Tech Industry, in which we spent, I would say, 85% of the meeting on the implementation of these strategies, such that it would address the specific needs of American businesses, but would also ensure that it doesn't just become yet another document on the books.
I think it's not possible to emphasize this enough, that it's not just about having another paper or policy in place, but the implementation aspect is key. And before we move on to Q&A, I want to give our panel members an opportunity to say anything else that they maybe didn't get to say in answering these questions, and if they can comment on anything that they would like, either from a public perspective or the private perspective. What can the Armenian bar or the diaspora lawyers do in this regard? We can be very useful, but our help is effective if it's disciplined. It's not just producing memos or papers or telling institutions to copy this law or that law. Really, our highest value is to provide this comparative expertise, identify barriers, or create usable templates, checklists, actionable stuff, and support the ministries and agencies and government bodies to help companies be investor ready, or to help the businesses take practical steps in the jurisdiction that they're trying to do business in. So if you have any comments in that regard, Greg, for our lawyers in the audience, or Zmarak, from your public sector perspective, please. Otherwise, I'll pass the mic to the audience for Q&A. Greg, anything?
I think that what's important is to come up with the way Karén, we've been doing with our working group, just come up with a comprehensive approach to help Armenia, implement the necessary controls and make necessary modifications in its laws to give assurances to countries like the U.S. It's not just the U.S. Obviously. We want tech transfers to also happen from Europe as well, to give assurances that the kinds of risks that they perceive that Armenia is taking is doing. The government of Armenia is taking steps to make sure that those risks are under control or minimized. And that requires a big picture, it requires a kind of a comprehensive approach. It's not just legal in nature, and it's not just having the right laws. It's also about enforcement, it's about implementation. It's also, it requires great diplomatic effort on the part of Armenia to engage with its strategic partners, such as like U.S. and in France, for example, to sort of facilitate this process of creating a much safer environment for the kinds of tech transfers that Armenia is anticipating as it builds its tech sector. So it requires a comprehensive approach, and I think that what I would like to see is, obviously, we're seeing some traction that the Armenian government is committed to this and is working with lawyers to make those implementations. but also that we as attorneys always have the big picture in mind and give the right sort of assurances and guidance to Armenia as it continues on this path towards technology growth and innovation, but also to have the necessary sort of enforcement and legal mechanisms to give the kinds of assurances that its partners are looking for, and also investors. I mean, it's a good thing, good for investors as well who are looking to invest in Armenia, that its judicial legal system is strong and it's getting stronger. And export controls are a component of that because again, there are certain risks that that others perceive that exist within Armenia, for example. Some items being sort of directed somewhere else that they shouldn't. So it's necessary for Armenia to have those necessary controls to give those assurances, so that investors and their partners perceive us as a safe environment and for tech transfers, and that's a necessary condition for innovation.
Thank you, Greg. I'm being told that we're running close on time. We probably won't have Q&A opportunity, but we're available after the panel to discuss. And I'm sure Greg is open to answering questions remotely. Zmarak, would you like to say a few points on what perhaps this audience or the diaspora lawyers that we might have joining us remotely can do in this context, or what you would ask?
Yeah, so I'll just make that one point briefly and tell you two things. One is, I think the absolute biggest source of help that we can get is usually from the diaspora. I do this work in Ukraine, and the Ukraine diaspora is amazing, and I think the U.S. can be incredibly helpful. A huge chunk of what we do is obviously a form of commercial diplomacy. You speak the language, you know the country, and you can connect in a way that's difficult for me to connect. I think you have an affinity to the country, and you might have this opportunity. And if nothing else, you go do some pro bono work, go there for free, and eat really amazing Armenian food. I'm not even that big of a meat eater, but when I was there, I think we went out every night and I ate meat there, and I came back thinking, oh, I have newfound love for meat. But I'll tell you the second thing. My family originally comes from Afghanistan, and so I can relate to this. My very first job in this office was on Afghanistan. And I felt like I understood something that was really hard for me to explain to other really talented lawyers that we had in our office. We used to do a lot of women's economic empowerment work there. It was about passing legislations to protect women and this policy, that policy. And I remember this one woman, one time we had a round table with her. She got up and she basically said, and she's speaking in the local language, which I understood, and then I translated it for everybody else. But she basically said, we have a saying in our language where it goes something like, a rich man's joke is funnier. She goes, I don't care what the Americans and Europeans say about this woman protection and that woman protection. If I depend on my husband, my father, my brother for income, my jokes are not funny. If my brother, my father, they depend on me for income, my jokes are hilarious. So she said, forget about the laws, create economic opportunities for us. You do that, and people depend on me, everybody's going to laugh at everything I say. And that's an example of how we pivoted away strictly from all these policies and laws to really then just creating economic opportunities for women so that their jokes could be funnier. And you could be that person to help the Armenian jokes funnier.
I appreciate, we definitely had some culinary adventures in Armenia together, and for those of you who haven't been, please definitely consider it. And although we didn't say many funny jokes on this panel, this I hope this was educational and informative, because we don't often get an opportunity to really talk about what committees of the Bar Association does. I know I was in the dark about many other committees and what they do for several years. So I'd like to close with 3 points and that I hope you have taken away from this discussion. Number one is that Armenia is now and has become an attractive location from a technology, business, and investment perspective because it combines both technical talent, diaspora capacity, and real momentum right now that is relevant in the current geopolitical environment. Second, that our committee work shows that legal reform can have real practical outcomes from things like software patentability and substantive examination at the IP office to improvements in corporate law and shareholder protection, university and technology transfer, our Armenian Mediation Arbitration Center, strategy work, and moving towards now judicial and prosecutorial training. These are real things on the ground and not just legal papers that someone did research and published somewhere. Although that is also very important, and we hope that that type of work continues as well. And lastly, that this next stage is more focused on awareness raising and implementation. Armenia must be able to show that it can protect this innovation, commercialize it, govern it, and handle now import-export control, as Greg was mentioning. And then resolve these disputes predictably with the judges and arbitrators and mediators and so forth. So this is how we move from being a place where technology work is just performed to a jurisdiction where valuable technology is created, protected, financed, commercialized, and brought abroad. I would like to thank our panelists very much, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us in this pre-lunch time period, and thank you all again for organizing this.
Thank you all. You guys will be so sick of me by the end of today. But thank you again to our panelists, Greg for joining on Zoom, Zmarak for being here in person, Karén as well.